Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Massar of Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV, and I'm delighted to have with me the president and CEO of Belvedere Vodka. We're talking about Rodney Williams. Rodney, nice to have you here. So much to get to because you guys have been talking about and then really acting on those conversations when it comes to sustainability at your company. But let me just kick up. Because I do want to get a feel of what you are seeing right now in our market and business environment.
Well, we are all well poised for a return to some sense of normalcy, but we're calling it a new normal because so much has changed, during the pandemic. In our industry, there was always off and on trade. Either you consume the product in a restaurant bar or you take it home to consume it
Right.
elsewhere.
Right.
But home itself now is this whole new channel where people are entertaining at home. They're making cocktails at home because they've had all this time during the pandemic to become more comfortable doing those sorts of things. So there's almost three channels versus two in the industry itself.
So it's interesting because, and we're going to move on in a second, but in terms of a recovery, because people were doing so much at home, I'm assuming there was a fair amount of demand, right, over this past year. So how do you determine whether or not the market environment is getting to kind of pre-pandemic levels and then maybe something a little extra because people are doing more things at homes and experimenting with making cocktails?
It's a great question. And, if we had a crystal ball, we'd be in great shape. But what we really are drawing from are lessons from China and Asia, countries that have sort of moved through the pandemic at an earlier pace than North America or Europe. And what we're certainly seeing is that the home consumption is continuing, but consumers have a huge, huge interest in going back to restaurants, going back to bars and nightclubs, and it's sort of validation that at the end of the day, humans are really social beings, and people really did miss that connection during the pandemic.
All right, so let's dig down and let's talk about sustainability because you guys have been talking about things for a while. It's really in your DNA in terms of a brand, but let's talk about the last couple of years. Last year, you launched your Made in Nature platform. This year, we have Belvedere Organic Infusions that came out in the spring. You have a new biomass facility, biomass capture facility that I want to talk about. So how long has this all been in the works? Tell me how it kind of all comes together. What's the thinking and the conversations that go on at Belvedere that really guide you in a sustainable way?
Yeah, sure. Well, when we look at Made with Nature, it's more than just a campaign for us. It's frankly a whole platform around which we organize all of our activities: communications, innovation, and certainly sustainability and CSR. The gestalt behind it is that when Belvedere was launched, it was really about being all natural. And a lot
Mhm.
of people miss that part of our narrative, that Belvedere has always been all natural, no additives, no sugar, because Poland was one of the first countries to appellate vodka the way France, Italy, US appellates wine, such that we can have no additives. We're non-GMO. All distilled spirits are gluten-free, and we're kosher certified. So we operate at these standards. And, you know, prior to the pandemic, this was kind of nice to have information, except for maybe the younger Gen Zs who are really, really into this. But
Mhm.
we all lived with the consequences and the forces of nature, and this has all become much more top of mind and relevant for a much broader consumer base.
Well, and
So
that's what I was
that,
curious. Well, and it's the
yeah,
consumer, it sounds like, that's leading it, right? The consumer wants to, as you said, you guys have always been natural, purified water, free of additives, as you said. You talked about your Polish rye. It's been there,
yeah.
but you needed to communicate that to the consumer.
Exactly. And we also needed to provide valuable proof points for what we're doing. So with organic infusions, the vodka is organic, the rye that we're using is organic, the herbs, the botanicals, everything about it is organic. And we do big research in our key markets, different countries and 3 different continents. And pre-pandemic, across the board, you had millennials and older Gen Zers saying, yes, the ingredients are important to me. And now post, as we're moving out of this era, we're finding that, some of it is because of the influences of kids being home from college on their parents, but cross-generationally, people are much more interested in simple ingredient lists, things that they definitely recognize, and things that they understand what they are, wholesome ingredients.
How easy, how hard is it to be organic completely? Because the supply chain has gotten much better than it was a few years ago, right? But the supply chain largely is still not that way.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. So one of the things that helps us is that Poland is the second biggest producer of rye in the world after Germany. So there's lots of access. And we have long relationships with our 8 key farmers from whom we gather the rye. And we've been working on this initiative for several years now. But it's not as easy as it seems, which is, I think, what you're driving towards. The yields from organic rye fields are 3 to 5 times less than a natural rye field. So it requires us then to be much more efficient in the rest of the supply chain to balance out, incremental costs that accrue from this. But the other part of the story is that even to be certified organic, and in our case, we're certified both in the EU and in the United States, we also have to recognize local market requirements, which can vary country to country. And in the U.S., California can have some incremental requirements to what the USDA requires. So it is quite complicated, but worth it in terms of what our consumers are asking of us.
Well, and I'm glad you covered that part of it, because I was thinking about, you're made in nature, as you were talking about, you have 3 umbrellas. It is organic product, it's green energy, it's sustainable packaging. And I want to kind of go through all of that. I mean, you talked about the organic component. How is it easy, I put in parentheses, green energy? How easy is sustainable packaging? How easy are those components to do?
Yeah, well, we've taken our time with it, to be frank with you. So in terms of green energy,
Why do you
we
take
actually
why do you take your time? Is it because
what,
it's this? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the ideas for it come from our employee base. So it wasn't as if we saw a consulting report or something back in 2012, but rather a group of employees said, hey, there are ways in which we can cut CO2 emissions. And it led to the idea of actually implementing a biomass capture facility at the distillery itself. So we take the steam and the heat as we're distilling the vodka and convert that into green energy. And so that's just come online. By the end of this year, we will have cut CO2 emissions by 80%. And by this time next year, we'll be carbon neutral, energy-wise, as we operate the distillery. So, and that idea, the whole idea for this came from a gentleman on the distillery leadership team who's actually getting his PhD in green energy. So we're proud to be his thesis proof point in terms of that. But what we also see, Carol, is that the employee base is so interested in offering ideas and seeing the business move in a way that's more ecologically sound. So we sort of have 3 pillars that we're operating on. One has to do with our own internal ecosystem. The other is around clean energy, and then what we're doing, writ large for society itself. And in terms of our ecosystem, we're looking at disposing of 40% less water in our distillation process by driving more efficiencies, which will allow us to use 27% less water from our wells by 2024. So it's these types of ideas that employees are
Right.
offering that are really helping sharpen the enterprise.
The biomass facility, you had to get the EU regulatory approval, right? Like, I mean, it was a process.
It was a huge process. So from 2012 to 2017, we were able to cut CO2 emissions by 42%. And we got a grant. We're the first distillery to win a
Hmm.
grant for green energy work from the European Commission in 2018. And we've used those resources and our own to really help perfect bringing a biomass capture facility online. And then the other virtuous part of the story is that we distill vodka for about 7 or 8 months out of the year. When we're not distilling, we're in the process of connecting to the local town's electricity grid because they
Hmm.
currently burn coal for electricity, and we'll be able to supply them with the green energy, clean energy that we're not using.
You know, it's interesting too. I think about what you all are doing, and it sounds like there's several drivers, Rodney. It's consumers, obviously, right? That's what they want. It's your employee base internally, what everybody's want. It's increasingly regulators who also are pushing all of that. On the regulatory front, are there things? I know the EU is doing a lot. Are there things that governments could do even more to kind of move the needle? Because I guess I bring this up is the pandemic, it was a crisis. Governments had to step in, they had to shut down the economy. I mean, people's lives were at risk. It took a crisis intervention. Climate change is at a crisis status. Most scientists, I'm not a scientist, but most scientists would put that out there. Do we need a government kind of crisis effort when it comes to sustainability efforts and to the climate at this point? Do they need to step in your view?
Well, yes, I think there is an opportunity for more synergy, frankly, between governments and to simplify some of the rules. So for us, creating organic infusions is just half the equation because the warehousing, the shipping process, all has to conform with
Hmm.
organic requirements which in Europe differ from country to country, in some cases quite significantly. So that part needs to get smoothed out, and I think it will happen. We're one of the first big brands to commit to organics, and I think as more do so, as consumers require and expect more of this, yes, I believe there is an opportunity for governments to streamline the regulations that they probably haven't paid all that much attention to.
You're a leader in your industry. What about across the industry, you know, in terms of working with competitors to some extent to improve the impact that your industry is having on the environment? You guys are obviously taking steps. Not necessarily everybody is doing the same thing. So how do you work together as an industry to even push the needle? And this goes to
Well,
leadership, right, on a greater scale.
yeah, no, it's a fair question. And I think one of the more valuable things that we've been able to participate in have been roundtables and symposiums with not only other competitors in our industry, but also with leading academicians. We've had a 16-year relationship with the Technical University of Łódź in Poland, as well as the Technical University in Poznan and Gdansk, and they have kept us very much up to the minute current in some of the debates about new sustainable strategies and organic agriculture. But I think the other part of the equation is that what is stable table stakes, what is expected each competitor in the category, is rising. 3 years ago, it was sort of big news when we and several others said that we would no longer use plastics and plastic straws in our events that we have all over the world. And but from there, it's evolved to that's just an expectation that consumers have now. Now they want to know, how are you taking it out of your packaging? How are you taking it out of your promotional materials? So the bars will continue to rise in terms of expectation, and I think that rising tide will bring the rest of the industry together to really rally around some of this.
But does it make you a little nervous? I mean, I will be very honest with you. In the newsroom, sometimes we'll hear a company put out targets and we're like, they're going to do that in 10 or 20 years. You know, I don't even know if the, New York coast is going to be around. And, like, you can imagine, the conversations, but we see it, whether
Yeah.
Venice, Florida, like, right, we know what's going on. So I do wonder, do you think we need to be faster about all of this?
We do, and we do, and it's such an imperative. And I think we're all seeing it now globally in terms of the intensity of climate. And
Hmm.
for an agrarian-based product like ours, which is dependent on rye, we're very cognizant of the impacts of climate change. So I think where 5 years ago in the research, brands that were working to be good stewards of the environment were thought of as that's a nice thing that they're doing, but it's not really a purchase driver. That's changing now, and consumers are taking much more seriously um, what is the track record, and probably will penalize brands that aren't really seriously moving in this direction of being more environmentally sensitive.
And I know you guys keep very close track on your supply chain and your rye. And I do wonder, um, use of things like blockchain and technology. Are we increasingly seeing that in your industry? Are you doing it? Are you thinking about it as a way of making sure you know exactly what you're using
Yes,
or
I mean,
getting?
I think one of the big lessons from the pandemic was that just-in-time supply is quite risky.
Hmm.
So we've certainly learned to rely on new technologies and other systems to accommodate for uncertainty. That's certain to come in the months to come, and as we were talking earlier, the new normal is that uncertainty is normal. And we can expect some of these dislocations. One thing that's helped us is that for decades now, we've worked with just these eight agricultural farmer suppliers.
Hmm. Right.
So we're able to be 100% traceable in our product and our use of our rye. And having those relationships allows us then to apply new technologies and even in terms of biomass capture, green energy, we hope down the road with our key partners.
One thing, this panel is about leading a sustainable brand. And I am curious of the conversations. You guys are owned by LVMH, well-known company. They own many luxury brands, including you guys. And you have been with the company for a long time. You understand how, the inner dynamics work. So when it comes to, you say, I want to spend this kind of money on a biomass capture facility, or I want to do this. And as you say, you find efficiencies in the rest of the supply chain so that you can keep costs down. What are the conversations like that you might be having with Bernard Arnault or some of the other senior executives? How does that go down?
They have been incredibly supportive. So we have always gotten the capex that we needed to really fund moving forward in these areas. And I think it's because the sense of luxury has sort of evolved over the years, even pre-pandemic, with consumers really looking not just in terms of authenticity about brands and craftsmanship, but for a meaningfulness and a purpose in terms of how they go about their business. And there are many brands when I look across the portfolio at LVMH who have been environmental leaders. Gerlong has done
Mhm.
tremendous work with bees and ecology. So this has been very consistent with that. And the LVMH team has been very supportive of our efforts here.
And I feel like I know the answer to this question because you talked about how ideas about being more sustainable come actually from your own team, but leading a company and having a strategy and an initiative and a plan, a sustainable plan, and then implementing it can sometimes be tough if not everybody's on board. Of course, you are the boss, but I mean, how do you kind of relate that message to everybody so that you can move towards a common mission?
Yeah, no, it's very important that all of our team really understands and rallies around our DNA. So we really spend a lot of time communicating that. And Made with Nature is sort of a consumer shorthand for the values and the principles that Belvedere has always stood for. And as we interact with our own employee base around these things, not only does it generate ideas, but it also generates a sense of pride and a sense of importance around what it is that we're doing. We're not curing cancer at the end of the day, but we can bring a product that's great to the world. And what we're also seeing, especially in developed markets, is that consumers are beginning to drink less but better at a younger age. And so with that, this whole push around made with nature and what it involves is quite consistent with those values.
So I want to ask you because you guys have laid out a lot of new commitments. As I said, you launched the Made with Nature platform and came out with those goals under those three umbrellas that happened last year. Are there any other new commitments that we can look forward to from you?
Oh, yeah. So, when we look at our home of Poland, it's interesting because Warsaw is the greenest capital in Europe, and Poland is actually the most forested country in
Mm.
Europe. But it also has a number of severe pollution sites and has suffered from some topsoil degradation over time. So we are embarking with our academic partners on a restorative agriculture initiative called Extraordinary Lands, which you'll hear more about, which is really making new technologies and growing techniques available to help restore topsoil in certain depleted areas. And we think from those learnings, we could possibly apply that many other places around the planet.
Which is pretty incredible, having had a recent conversation with food CEOs about concerns about how do we sustainably continue to feed the world. This has been an incredible conversation. I have one more question I want to ask you, and that is Sustainability 3.0. What does that look like for you guys, or how do you think it needs to look like for the world?
Yeah. So there are a number of elements to it, we think. One certainly has to do with how the product is made and the ingredients. Another element is in terms of our efficiencies and how do we find creative ways to take out costs and to conserve resources and to do things in a much more renewable fashion than perhaps we had initially even thought possible. So we've been experimenting, and thanks to the LVMH R&D team, with a number of different substrates and materials that really we think are the future for sustainability or part of sustainability 3.0 and taking it to that next level.